Tears streamed down Maya Rodriguez's face as the word "fired" echoed through the bustling cafe like a thunderclap. Each syllable was a hammer blow to her already fragile world. Her supervisor's voice was cold and clinical, citing violation of company policy and unauthorized financial transactions. Her transgression? Paying for a desperate, hungry man's $18 sandwich with her own tip money. As she was escorted out, her apron stripped away, she felt the burning stares of coworkers and customers alike. She had lost everything for a simple act of kindness. But what she didn't know, what no one could have known, was that the homeless man she helped was no homeless man at all. And his return the next day wouldn't just change her life. It would shatter the very foundations of the multi-billion-dollar corporation that had just cast her aside. The alarm on Maya Rodriguez's phone didn't chime, it shrieked a piercing 4:30 a.m. digital scream that sliced through the thin walls of her small Phoenix apartment. For a moment she lay still, feeling the familiar ache in her lower back, a dull reminder of yesterday's 14-hour shift. The scent of reheated coffee and her daughter's vanilla-scented laundry detergent hung in the air. This was her world, a symphony of exhaustion and love played on an endless loop. She slid out of bed, her bare feet meeting the cold tile floor. In the other room, her 9-year-old daughter, Sophia, coughed, a dry, rattling sound that made Maya's heart seize every time. Sophia's diabetes was a constant, unwelcome presence in their lives, dictated by blood sugar monitors, insulin pens, and the cruel lottery of genetics. The new glucose monitor sat on Sophia's bedside table, a digital monument to their last emergency room visit and the mountain of medical debt it had created. Maya was 31, but on mornings like this, she felt ancient. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a woman she barely recognized. The bright, hopeful eyes of her youth were now framed by faint lines of worry. Her dark hair, once her pride, was perpetually pulled back in a severe, functional ponytail. She worked at Sunrise Cafe, a trendy establishment in Scottsdale owned by the sprawling corporate giant Meridian Food Group. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work that barely paid the rent and kept Sophia's medical supplies stocked. The uniform was a crisp white shirt and black slacks that always seemed to absorb the smell of espresso, no matter how many times she washed them. As she buttoned her shirt, she ran through the day's mental checklist, dropped Sophia at her grandmother's house. Pray the old Honda starts. Remember the Wednesday special is the Southwest breakfast wrap. And most importantly, stay on the right side of Janet Morrison. Janet was the cafe's assistant manager, a woman who seemed forged from corporate policy and bitter disappointment. She managed with an iPad in one hand and a stopwatch mentality. To Janet, customers weren't people, they were revenue streams. Employees weren't a team, they were labor costs to be minimized. Rodriguez, you're 4 minutes late, Janet would say if Maya clocked in at 6:04 a.m. That's 240 seconds of unproductive wage expense the company has to absorb. Maya swallowed a piece of dry toast, kissed sleeping Sophia on the forehead, and whispered, "Be good for Abuela, baby. Mommy loves you." She left a note on the counter with a small glass of orange juice and slipped out into the pre-dawn chill of the Arizona desert. Sunrise Cafe was already buzzing with low-level anxiety when she arrived. The baristas were pulling espresso shots, the kitchen staff was prepping avocado toast, and the other morning shift servers were rushing around with practiced, joyless urgency. "Morning, Maya," sighed Jessica, another server, as she loaded a tray with ceramic mugs. "Janet's on the warpath today. Corporate sending someone for a surprise visit." Maya's stomach tightened. Corporate visits meant Janet would be 10 times more demanding, scrutinizing every coffee pour and every crumb on the floor. The morning rush was controlled chaos. Orders flew, plates were delivered, and specialty drinks were crafted. Maya moved with efficiency born of years of practice. A forced smile never leaving her face. She was patient with the demanding businessman in booth 3 who always complained his latte wasn't hot enough. She was gracious with the table of indecisive college students. She even managed genuine laughter for Mrs. Chen, a regular who told the same joke every morning. Through it all, she was acutely aware of Janet's hawk-like surveillance, following her every move. She saw Janet tap her tablet as Maya spent an extra moment helping Mrs. Chen with her walker. She saw the slight frown when a toddler at one of her tables spilled apple juice, forcing Maya to stop and clean it up. By midday, the initial rush had subsided into a manageable flow. Maya finally had a moment to breathe, leaning against the service station and rubbing her aching feet. Her tips so far were modest. After paying her mother for babysitting and buying groceries, there would be barely enough to cover Sophia's insulin prescription copay. The anxiety, never far from the surface, began to bubble up again. She had to make more. She had to turn tables faster, upsell more pastries, be the perfect employee. It was then, at precisely 1:20 p.m., that the door chime announced a new arrival. The man who shuffled in was the kind of person most people try not to see. His clothes were threadbare, his graying hair unkempt, and his face was etched with the deep, weary lines of someone who had lived rough. He hesitated at the entrance, scanning the trendy cafe with a mixture of hunger and shame. Janet, stationed near the register, spotted him immediately. Her expression hardened into a razor-sharp line of disapproval. She was already moving toward him, her body language radiating hostility, ready to escort him out before he could take another step. But Maya, whose section included the empty tables by the window, saw him first. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and in his gaze she didn't see a nuisance or a problem. She saw profound, desperate exhaustion. Acting on an instinct she couldn't explain, Maya grabbed a menu, stepped in front of the glowering Janet, and gave the man a gentle smile. "Table by the window?" she asked softly. The man looked surprised, then nodded slowly. Janet stopped dead in her tracks, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. The battle lines had just been drawn, and Maya had no idea she was fighting for a man who held an entire empire in his weathered hands. The man slid into the booth by the window, moving with a careful stiffness that spoke of old injuries and harder times. He hunched over the menu Maya had given him, though he didn't seem to be reading it. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he traced the laminated edges. From across the cafe, Maya could feel Janet's laser-focused glare burning into her back. It was an act of open defiance to have seated him, and they both knew it. Maya approached the table, her notepad ready. "Can I get you something to drink to start? Our cold brew is fresh." The man looked up, and Maya noticed his eyes were a surprisingly clear, intelligent green, though clouded with exhaustion. "Just water, please," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Thank you." When she returned with the water, he still hadn't opened the menu. He sat staring out at the busy Scottsdale Street, watching Range Rovers and Teslas navigate the midday traffic, a solitary island in the bustling cafe. "Have you decided what you'd like?" Maya asked gently, keeping her tone professional but kind. He flinched slightly, as if startled from deep thought. "Oh, I." He looked down at the menu, then back at her, shame coloring his weathered cheeks. "What's the cheapest thing you have that's filling?" Maya's heart sank. She'd heard that question before in different forms, the college student trying to stretch $10, the elderly regular counting out exact change, the single father calculating if he could afford lunch for 2 kids. "The Southwest wrap is our best value," she said, pointing to the lunch section. "Scrambled eggs, peppers, cheese, and hash browns. It's $12. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Or the kitchen-made extra turkey chili for the staff lunch. It's not on the menu. But I could get you a big bowl with cornbread for $8. His green eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. "The chili," he said, his voice cracking. "Yes, please. Thank you." As Maya walked to the kitchen to place the order, she felt that familiar sense of purpose that had drawn her to service work years ago, before life had worn her down. It was about the simple human act of nourishing someone, of offering comfort and dignity. The man, who had quietly said his name was Jim, ate the chili with deliberate care, savoring each spoonful as if it were a gourmet meal. He didn't wolf it down like someone starving, but ate with quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his disheveled appearance. Maya kept his water glass filled, checking on him as she would any customer, despite Janet's increasingly obvious glares and pointed gestures toward the other, more profitable tables in her section. Jim was observant. Maya didn't know it, but he was watching everything. He watched her patiently explain the gluten-free options to a health-conscious customer who changed her mind 3 times. He saw her slip a packet of crackers to a fussy toddler, earning a grateful smile from the exhausted mother. He watched her expertly balance 4 plates on one arm, moving with practiced grace despite obvious fatigue. He saw her coworker Jessica accidentally spill a tray of iced coffees, and watched as Maya was the first to help, not with complaints but with quiet efficiency, saying, "Don't worry, I've got it," as she helped mop up the mess. Most importantly, he observed her interactions with Janet. He saw the manager reprimand Maya in hushed, angry tones for spending too long at his table. "Your job is to maximize revenue per table, Rodriguez, not run a charity. That booth has been occupied for 40 minutes for an $8 sale. Unacceptable." Maya simply nodded, her face composed, and replied, "Yes, Janet." When Jim finished eating, he sat nursing his water glass for a long time. Finally, he signaled for the check. Maya brought it over with an encouraging smile. "No rush at all," she said softly. He nodded and reached into his worn jacket pockets. He patted his chest pocket, then his back pockets. Confusion crossed his face, quickly morphing into panic. He began searching more frantically, his breathing becoming shallow. "Is everything all right?" Maya asked, her smile fading into concern. "My wallet," he stammered, his eyes wide with genuine fear. "It's gone. Someone must have taken it on the bus. I can't pay." He looked utterly mortified, his face pale beneath the weathered skin. He started to rise as if to flee. "I'm so sorry. This has never happened before." This was the moment of truth. Company policy was crystal clear, drilled into them by Janet and reinforced in Meridian Food Group training manuals. If a customer cannot pay, you do not engage. You do not negotiate. You signal the manager immediately. Janet would call security or police, depending on the situation. Zero-tolerance policy, designed to prevent theft and protect assets. Maya looked at the terrified man in front of her. Then she glanced across the cafe at Janet, who was already watching them with narrowed, suspicious eyes. She knew exactly what she was supposed to do. She was supposed to signal Janet, let the cold machinery of corporate policy grind this poor man into dust over an $8 bowl of chili. She thought of Sophia waiting at her grandmother's house. She thought of the insulin prescription she still needed to pick up. She thought of her precarious financial situation and how desperately she needed this job. Losing it would be catastrophic. Then she looked back at Jim, at the crushing humiliation in his green eyes. In that moment, her own struggles didn't make her harder, they made her compassionate. She understood desperation. She knew what it felt like to be one unlucky break away from disaster. Making a split-second decision that would change everything, she gave him a reassuring look and gently touched his arm. "Don't worry about it," she whispered. "Stay here. Please." Before he could protest, she walked away, not toward Janet, but toward her apron pocket where she kept the day's tips. Maya's heart hammered as she fumbled for the crumpled bills, a 10, 2 5s, and some singles. $23 total. It was her gas money, her grocery money, her just-in-case Sophia's blood sugar crashes at school money. With trembling hands, she smoothed out an $8 bill and walked to the point-of-sale terminal, her back to Janet. She quickly entered the table number and selected cash payment, opening the drawer to deposit her own money. "What are you doing, Rodriguez?" The voice was ice-cold, right behind her. Maya froze, her hand still inside the cash drawer. She slowly turned to face Janet Morrison, whose expression was thunderous. "I was just cashing out table 12, Maya stammered. "With what money?" Janet's voice was dangerously quiet. I watched you. That man told you he couldn't pay. I saw it on his face. And you did not signal for management per protocol. Maya's mind raced. He found the money. It was in a different pocket. It was a weak lie that crumbled instantly under Janet's piercing stare. Open your hand, Janet commanded. Maya hesitated. Now, Rodriguez, or I'll have you escorted out by security. Defeated, Maya opened her hand, revealing her crumpled tip money. Janet's eyes moved from the bills to the cash drawer and back again. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. So this is how it is, Janet announced, her voice rising to attract attention from nearby staff and customers. You're using your own funds to pay for a customer's meal. An unauthorized transaction. A flagrant violation of Meridian Food Group Policy 4C, employee funds shall not be commingled with company revenue under any circumstances. The cafe was growing quiet. The hiss of the espresso machine and the low hum of conversation faded as people turned to watch. At table 12, Jim looked on in horror, starting to stand. He was hungry, Janet, Maya pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper. It was $8. What was I supposed to do? Follow procedure, Janet snapped, her voice now a full declaration for the entire room. You've undermined my authority and willfully disregarded corporate policy. You've proven you cannot be trusted. Maya Rodriguez, Janet announced with cold finality, your employment with Meridian Food Group is terminated. You're fired. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Fired. Maya felt the floor seem to tilt beneath her feet. Around her, the cafe had fallen silent except for the hiss of the espresso machine and the distant hum of traffic outside. Brenda, please, Maya whispered, her voice cracking. My daughter. I need this job. You should have thought of your daughter before deciding to play charity worker, Janet replied coldly, her iPad clutched like a weapon. Remove your apron. Your final paycheck will be mailed. You have 5 minutes to collect your belongings. Numbly, Maya untied her apron strings. The white fabric suddenly felt impossibly heavy in her hands. She folded it carefully and placed it on the counter, tears streaming down her cheeks freely now. She looked past Janet toward table 12. Jim was standing, his weathered face pale with horror, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked like he wanted to speak, to scream, to tear the whole place down. But what could he do? He was nobody, a homeless man who had inadvertently cost a kind woman her livelihood. Their eyes met one last time, and in his green gaze she saw profound, agonizing regret. As Janet marched her toward the employee lockers, the silence was broken by the sound of a chair scraping back. Someone had left a $20 bill on table 12, next to the half-empty water glass. But it was too late. Maya Rodriguez, mother, server, and Good Samaritan, was now unemployed. The walk to the parking lot felt like a death march. Maya's old Honda sat baking in the Arizona sun, its paint faded and bumper dented from years of struggle. She sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, unable to start the engine, staring at the Sunrise Cafe through the windshield. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, Sophia asking when Mama's coming home. Everything okay, Mija? Maya stared at the message. Unable to respond. How could she explain that she just lost their only source of income for $8 worth of chili? The drive home was a blur of strip malls and traffic lights. Phoenix stretched endlessly under the desert sun, a sprawling maze of survival where one wrong move could destroy everything you'd built. When she finally reached their small apartment complex, the 3 flights of stairs felt like climbing a mountain. Each step was leaden, her legs trembling with exhaustion and shock. The key fumbled in the lock, her hands shaking too much to guide it home. Finally, the door opened and she stepped into the blessed coolness of their air-conditioned refuge. For a moment, she just stood in the small entryway, her purse sliding from her shoulder and landing with a soft thud. The reality crashed down with devastating force. Fired for being kind, she whispered to the empty apartment. The words echoed mockingly off the walls. She sank onto their second-hand couch, the springs groaning in protest. The tears had run dry during the drive home, leaving behind a hollow, aching numbness. Her mind, however, was pure chaos. How would she pay rent? Their landlord, Mr. Castellanos, was understanding but firm about payments. How would she afford Sophia's insulin? The prescription was waiting at the pharmacy, its cost looming like a monster in her thoughts. What about food? The refrigerator was already looking sparse. Her eyes fell on a framed photograph on the end table, her and her late husband Carlos at Sophia's first birthday party 3 years ago. They were smiling, their faces bright with hope for a future that had seemed so full of promise. Carlos had been a chef at an upscale restaurant downtown, also owned by Meridian Food Group. He'd been passionate, creative, beloved by his co-workers. Then one night, he'd been terminated for unauthorized use of company inventory. He'd made a birthday cake for a dishwasher whose family couldn't afford one, using flour, eggs, and sugar from the pantry. He was fired on the spot by a manager just like Janet, a woman who saw only theft, not human decency. The dismissal had broken Carlos's spirit. He struggled to find work with that mark on his record. The stress, the shame, it led him down a dark path of depression and drinking. 6 months later, he was gone, leaving Maya alone with toddler Sophia and an ocean of grief. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. The same corporation with its same heartless policies had now shattered her life just as it had destroyed his. It was a cruel cycle, a pattern of corporate indifference claiming her family twice. A wave of anger, hot and fierce, finally broke through the numbness. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Carlos. It was about every small person crushed by the machinery of giant companies that value profits over people. She walked to Sophia's room, needing to see her daughter's peaceful face. The child was still at her grandmother's house, blissfully unaware that their world had just collapsed. The room was small but filled with love, drawings taped to the walls, a worn stuffed rabbit on the pillow, the glucose monitor and insulin supplies organized neatly on the dresser. Sophia was her whole universe. Everything Maya did, she did for this little girl. And now she had failed her. That thought finally broke her. She sank to the floor beside Sophia's bed and wept, for her lost job, for her shattered pride, for the uncertain future stretching ahead. She wept for Carlos and the life they were supposed to have. She wept for the crushing unfairness of it all. As the afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long shadows across the room, Maya felt utterly and completely alone. Meanwhile, in a world of panoramic city views and polished mahogany, another soul was being consumed by shame and purpose. James Sullivan, known to Maya only as Jim, sat in the back of his chauffeured Mercedes, having shed the ragged clothes now stuffed in a bag. He wore an impeccable Armani suit, but the transformation was only surface deep. Inside, he remained the man from Table 12, horrified, ashamed, and powerless. He hadn't intervened. That reality played on a torturous loop in his mind. He, James Sullivan, CEO and chairman of Meridian Food Group, a man whose word could create or destroy careers, had sat by and watched a decent woman be publicly humiliated and fired for showing him kindness. His undercover consultant had insisted, "Observe and report, Mr. Sullivan. Do not engage. Intervention compromises the entire project." What a fool he'd been. This exercise, cooked up by his PR team, was supposed to reconnect him with the company his grandfather had built. See the front lines, his grandfather had always said. A company's heart isn't in the boardroom, it's on the restaurant floor. He'd expected to find inefficiency, maybe minor theft, things he could fix with policy changes. Instead, he found Maya. And he found Janet. He had witnessed the brutal manifestation of the corporate culture he had fostered. Janet wasn't evil, she was a product, the perfect manager by his company's standards. She maximized profit and eliminated inefficiencies. And Maya, with her boundless compassion, was the inefficiency Janet had eliminated. The car pulled up to the gleaming Meridian Tower. In his penthouse office, city lights spread below like scattered jewels. This view had always inspired him, a symbol of his success. Tonight it made him feel small and isolated. He buzzed his assistant. "Get me Janet Morrison's file from the Scottsdale Sunrise location. And pull the complete employment record from Maya Rodriguez. Now." As he waited, pacing his office, one thought consumed him: he had created a system where a mother's livelihood could be destroyed over $8. The knowledge was sickening. Tomorrow, he would return to that cafe. Not as Jim the Vagrant, but as James Sullivan, CEO. And everything would change. James Sullivan didn't sleep. He spent the entire night in his penthouse office, surrounded by personnel files and financial reports, uncovering a pattern that made him physically sick. Maya Rodriguez wasn't an isolated incident, she was part of a systemic failure. The numbers were damning. Under Janet Morrison's management, the Scottsdale Sunrise Cafe had the highest employee turnover rate in the Southwest region. In 18 months, she had terminated 42 employees for various policy violations. Most were fired for what corporate called unauthorized customer interactions, helping elderly customers, comforting crying children, offering water to delivery drivers. But the profits were stellar. Janet's location generated 23% higher revenue per square foot than the regional average. To corporate executives, she was a star performer. His hands shook as he opened Maya's employment file. 3 years of perfect attendance, 0 customer complaints, multiple commendations from coworkers. Her emergency contact listed her daughter Sophia, age 9, with a note about diabetes management. Then he found Carlos Rodriguez's termination report from 3 years earlier. The details were haunting: fired for making a birthday cake for a dishwasher using company ingredients worth $12. The regional manager had written, employee showed complete disregard for inventory control. Carlos had spiraled after his termination. Unemployment, depression, drinking. The file contained a death certificate dated 8 months after his firing, alcohol-related liver failure at age 34. James stared at the document spread across his mahogany desk. He had killed that man as surely as if he'd pulled a trigger. The corporate culture he'd built had destroyed a family, orphaned a child, and now it had claimed Maya too. At 6 a.m., he called his driver. "We're going to Scottsdale." The Sunrise Cafe. The morning at Sunrise Cafe was tense. Maya's absence was a gaping wound in the staff's rhythm. Jessica struggled to cover both sections while baristas whispered nervously about whether Janet would fire someone else. Janet Morrison prowled the floor with increased vigilance, her iPad clutched like a shield. Yesterday's termination had sent exactly the message she'd intended: no employee was indispensable. She was reviewing inventory reports when the door chimed. A group of impeccably dressed people entered, 2 men and a woman in expensive suits, moving with quiet authority. The lead man was tall, silver-haired, with intelligent green eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. Janet's brain struggled to process what she was seeing. Those eyes were familiar, the same eyes that had looked up at her from table 12 yesterday. The man walked directly toward her, flanked by his companions. Other customers instinctively gave them space. "Good morning," the man said, his voice carrying smooth authority. "Ms. Morrison, I presume?" Janet's mouth went dry. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" He smiled with cold precision. "My name is James Sullivan. I'm the CEO of Meridian Food Group. And we met yesterday, though you knew me by a different name." The iPad slipped from Janet's fingers, clattering on the floor. The cafe fell silent, conversation stopped mid-sentence, coffee cups paused halfway to lips. "Mr. Sullivan?" Janet stammered, her face draining of color. "Yesterday, I sat at table 12 as Jim, a hungry man who couldn't pay for his meal. I watched you fire Maya Rodriguez for showing me kindness. I watched you destroy a woman's livelihood over $8 while quoting corporate policy as gospel. He gestured to his companions. This is Rebecca Chen, our head of human resources, and Michael Torres from legal. We're here to conduct an immediate review of this location's operations. James turned to address the entire cafe. To all staff members, your jobs are safe. We're here to fix what's broken, not punish those forced to work within a broken system. His gaze returned to Janet, all warmth vanishing. Ms. Morrison, in 18 months, you've terminated 42 employees. You run this location like a police state, prioritizing profit margins over human dignity. Janet was trembling now. Her authority crumbling. Sir, I was following company policy. The handbook clearly states. I wrote that handbook, James interrupted sharply. I signed off on those policies, and I've never been more ashamed. You did exactly what the system I created taught you to do. That's the problem. He pulled out his phone and dialed. After 3 rings, a weary voice answered. Hello? Maya Rodriguez? Yes. Who is this? My name is James Sullivan. I'm the CEO of Meridian Food Group. You helped me yesterday, I was Jim at table 12. Silence, heavy with confusion and disbelief. I don't understand, Maya finally said. I know you don't. And I am profoundly sorry for what happened. What you did was the most decent thing I've witnessed in years, and you were punished for it. That ends today. He took a breath, everyone in the cafe hanging on every word. Maya, I've been reviewing your file. And your husband's. Carlos Rodriguez was terminated by this company 3 years ago for making a birthday cake for a coworker. I remember signing off on that decision. I am directly responsible for what happened to him. At Carlos's name, there was a sharp intake of breath. Janet's eyes widened, she knew about that legendary firing. I need you to come back to the cafe, James continued. There's something we need to discuss. It's about your future, and making sure no other family goes through what yours has endured. I'll be there in 30 minutes, Maya said, her voice sharp with new intensity. James ended the call and looked at Janet, whose face had gone ghostly pale. The woman you fired yesterday was the widow of a man we failed, he said quietly. You didn't just terminate an employee. You perpetuated a cycle of corporate cruelty. In 30 minutes, Maya Rodriguez would walk through that door. And James Sullivan would begin the most important conversation of his life. Maya Rodriguez walked into Sunrise Cafe like someone entering a dream. The 30-minute Uber ride, paid for by the car service James Sullivan had arranged, had done little to prepare her for the scene inside. Her former co-workers were gathered in small, quiet groups. Her former manager Janet was sitting rigidly at a corner table, pale and silent. And in the center of it all stood the man from table 12, no longer Jim the vagrant, but James Sullivan, CEO, his commanding presence filling the entire space. He turned as she entered, and the look on his face was one of profound remorse mixed with determined purpose. Maya, he began, his voice filled with emotion she couldn't identify. Thank you for coming. First, before anything else, I want to apologize. What happened to you yesterday was an unforgivable failure on my part and on the part of the company I lead. Maya was still processing the surreal nature of it all. You're really the CEO, she stated, the words feeling foreign. I am, he confirmed. And I've been a poor one. I lost sight of what this company was built on, treating people with dignity. You reminded me of that yesterday. Your compassion, your integrity, even when it cost you everything. He gestured toward an empty booth. Please, sit with me. Hesitantly, she slid into the booth. For the first time, she wasn't his server, they were equals. When I reviewed your employee file, he continued gently, I found something that shattered me. Your husband's name, Carlos Rodriguez. I remembered his case from 3 years ago. Maya stiffened, old wounds reopening with fresh pain. We fired him for giving a birthday cake to a man who had nothing, James said, not flinching from her accusing gaze. It was a decision made by regional management, but I was CEO. I endorsed the culture that allowed it. A culture that valued $12 worth of ingredients over human dignity. He paused, his voice thick with regret. Maya, Carlos's firing wasn't just a mistake. It was a moral failure that I believe contributed to what happened to him. And for that, I am deeply, truly sorry. Tears welled in Maya's eyes, but this time they were tears of validation, a long-held pain finally being acknowledged. I cannot undo the past, James said, leaning forward earnestly. I cannot bring Carlos back. But I can promise you that starting today, his legacy and your act of kindness will become the foundation for fundamental change throughout this corporation. He pulled out a folder thick with documents. I'm not here just to offer you your job back, Maya. You deserve better than that. I'm creating a new division within Meridian Food Group, the Human First Initiative. Its purpose will be to completely overhaul our corporate policies, implement employee support programs, and ensure that compassion becomes the cornerstone of how we operate. Maya stared at him, speechless. We'll establish emergency funds for employees facing crises, completely revamp management training, and create real channels for feedback from ground-level employees. We'll audit every termination from the past 5 years and offer reinstatement where appropriate. He looked directly into her eyes. And I want you to lead it. I want you to be the director of this initiative. Not someone with an MBA who's never worked a day in food service, but someone who understands the human cost of heartless policies. Someone with integrity, courage, and heart. I want you, Maya. Maya was stunned. Me? I'm a server. I don't know how to run a corporate division. You know how to be decent, James countered. That's the most important qualification. We'll provide training, resources, a team, an office at headquarters, and a salary that ensures you and Sophia never worry about medical bills or rent again. He spread the documents across the table. I'm not offering you a job, Maya. I'm asking you to be my partner in transforming this company. Help me build something Carlos would have been proud to work for. Across the cafe, Janet Morrison watched this exchange with growing comprehension. Her world of rigid rules and profit margins was crumbling, replaced by something she'd never considered, putting humanity first. Maya looked at the contract, at the salary figure that would change everything for her and Sophia. But more than that, she saw an opportunity to honor Carlos's memory, to ensure no other family suffered as hers had. What about Janet? Maya asked quietly. James glanced toward the corner table. Ms. Morrison will be transitioning to a new role. She's actually an excellent operational manager, her numbers prove that. But she needs retraining on leadership and empathy. She'll work under Rebecca Chen for 6 months, learning how to manage people, not just metrics. He turned back to Maya. This won't be easy. Changing corporate culture takes years. There will be resistance from shareholders, pushback from regional managers who've built careers on the old system. Are you prepared for that fight? Maya thought of Sophia waiting at her grandmother's house, of Carlos's memory, of every server who'd ever been torn between policy and humanity. A slow, determined smile touched her lips. Mr. Sullivan, she said, her voice clear and steady. Yesterday you were a stranger who needed help, and I helped you. Today you're offering me a chance to help thousands of people I'll never meet. The answer is yes. James Sullivan let out a breath he'd been holding. It was the beginning of a long journey, but it was the right beginning. The Golden Sunrise Cafe, once the scene of cruel corporate indifference, had just become the birthplace of a revolution. All because one server chose kindness over policy, and one CEO was finally ready to choose humanity over profit. As Maya signed the contract that would transform both their lives, neither of them knew they were about to prove that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of compassion. The story of Maya Rodriguez and James Sullivan would become legendary in business schools, not as a fairy tale, but as proof that corporate America could have both a conscience and a heart. 3 months after the confrontation that changed everything, Maya Rodriguez stood in her new corner office on the 15th floor of Meridian Tower, watching the Phoenix skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The view still took her breath away, but it was the framed photo on her desk that truly grounded her, Sophia. Healthy and smiling, holding her diabetes supplies with confidence instead of shame. The Human First initiative had grown beyond James Sullivan's wildest expectations. What started as Maya's personal mission had become a corporate revolution, transforming not just Meridian Food Group but inspiring competitors across the industry. Maya's first act as director had been creating the Employee Emergency Fund, a no-questions-asked financial safety net for workers facing medical crises, family emergencies, or unexpected hardships. The fund had already helped 47 employees, including Jessica from the Scottsdale Cafe, whose son needed emergency surgery. The beauty of it, Maya explained to a visiting journalist, is that employees don't have to grovel or justify their need. If you're part of the Meridian family and you're struggling, we're here for you. Period. The policy overhaul had been comprehensive. The rigid, zero-tolerance rules that had destroyed so many lives were replaced with human discretion protocols. Managers were now required to consider context, intent, and individual circumstances before taking disciplinary action. Janet Morrison, to everyone's surprise, had become one of the program's strongest advocates. After 6 months of intensive retraining under Rebecca Chen, she'd returned to management with a transformed perspective. I was terrified at first, Janet admitted during a company-wide video conference. I thought compassion meant chaos, that flexibility meant failure. But I've learned that when you treat people with dignity, they respond with loyalty and excellence. Her Scottsdale location, once notorious for its turnover rate, now had the highest employee satisfaction scores in the Southwest region. Productivity had actually increased, not despite the human-focused policies, but because of them. The success stories were mounting. At the Denver location, a manager had worked with a single father struggling with childcare, adjusting his schedule instead of firing him for tardiness. The employee became one of their top performers. In Austin, a server with social anxiety was given accommodation for her condition rather than termination. She'd gone on to train new hires in customer service excellence. Maya's favorite success story was about Carlos's legacy. Using her position, she'd researched every employee terminated for compassionate violations over the past 5 years. 43 people had been fired for helping customers, sharing food with coworkers, or showing basic human kindness. All 43 were offered reinstatement with back pay and formal apologies. 31 accepted. 2 had started their own businesses and politely declined. The remaining 10 had passed away or couldn't be located, a sobering reminder of how corporate cruelty ripples through lives. James Sullivan had proved to be more than just talk. He'd absorbed the financial cost of the reforms without complaint, even when quarterly profits dipped slightly. When shareholders questioned the expense, he'd stood firm. We're not just running restaurants, he told the board. We're building communities. The Human First initiative isn't a cost, it's an investment in our company's soul. The media attention had been extraordinary. Maya found herself featured on magazine covers, speaking at business conferences, and consulting with other corporations seeking to implement similar programs. She'd been named to Forbes' 40 Under 40 list and received the Corporate Social Responsibility Leadership Award. But the recognition that meant most came from an unexpected source, a handwritten letter from Jim, the elderly regular customer at a Meridian Cafe in Tucson. His granddaughter was battling leukemia, and the local manager, following new protocols, had allowed him to sit for hours each day, nursing a single coffee while he waited for hospital updates. The old policy would have forced him out after 30 minutes. That young lady gave me a place to belong when I had nowhere else to go, Jim had written. Please tell her that kindness still matters in this world. Maya kept that letter in her desk drawer, next to Carlos's death certificate, a reminder of how far they'd come and why it mattered. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some regional managers had resisted the changes, clinging to the old metrics-driven culture. A few had been reassigned or encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere. There'd been pushback from investors concerned about short-term profit impacts. But the numbers eventually spoke for themselves. Employee retention improved dramatically, reducing training costs. Customer satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Workers who felt valued and supported went above and beyond for both customers and colleagues. Sophia's health had stabilized with the stress reduction in their lives. Maya could now afford the best medical care, the newest glucose monitoring technology, and even a college savings account. But more importantly, Sophia had a mother who came home energized rather than exhausted, excited about work rather than dreading it. "Mommy," Sophia had said recently, "you smile different now. Like you're happy all the way down to your toes." On her office wall, Maya had hung a photo from Carlos's memorial service 3 years earlier, a small, sad gathering of family and a few coworkers. Beside it hung a photo from the first annual Meridian Family Day, where over 2,000 employees and their families had celebrated together in Scottsdale's Civic Center Park. James Sullivan had spoken at that event, acknowledging the company's past failures and celebrating its transformation. But the moment that had brought Maya to tears was when he'd read a poem Sophia had written about her father, honoring Carlos's memory as the inspiration for the Human First initiative. As Maya prepared to leave the office that evening, her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Board meeting went great. Full approval for expanding Human First to all 847 locations by year-end. Carlos would be proud." She smiled, gathering her things. Tomorrow she'd fly to Seattle to help launch the program at their West Coast locations. Next month, she'd address the National Restaurant Association's annual conference. The little girl from Pilsen who'd once rationed insulin and grocery money was now reshaping corporate America. But tonight, she was simply Maya Rodriguez, picking up her daughter from her grandmother's house, grateful for second chances and the power of choosing kindness over policy. The story that had begun with $8 and a bowl of chili had become a testament to the transformative power of human decency, proof that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can change entire worlds. 5 years after the incident that changed everything, Maya Rodriguez stood before the Phoenix Convention Center's main auditorium, preparing to deliver the keynote address to the National Corporate Responsibility Summit. The theme of this year's conference was "Compassion as Competitive Advantage," a concept that would have been laughable in boardrooms just half a decade ago. Her presentation title, "From $8 to $8 billion, How One Act of Kindness Transformed Corporate America." In the audience sat James Sullivan, now retired but serving as chairman emeritus of Meridian Food Group. Beside him was Sophia Rodriguez Sullivan. Yes, she had legally changed her name to honor the man who had become like a grandfather to her. Now 14 and thriving, Sophia served as a youth ambassador for the Meridian Foundation, speaking to other children with chronic illnesses about resilience and hope. The transformation had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. The Human First initiative had grown from a single experimental program to an industry standard copied by hundreds of corporations worldwide. Harvard Business School now taught a case study on the Rodriguez-Sullivan model, while Maya's book, Leading with Heart, had topped bestseller lists for 18 consecutive weeks. "When I paid for that bowl of chili 5 years ago," Maya began her speech, "I thought I was just helping one hungry person. I had no idea I was about to help heal an entire corporate culture." The statistics she shared were staggering. Employee turnover at Meridian had dropped by 78%. Customer satisfaction scores had reached unprecedented highs. Most remarkably, despite initial investor concerns, profits had increased by 34% over 5 years as employee engagement and customer loyalty soared. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real triumph was in the lives changed. Maria Santos, a single mother from Dallas, had been able to keep her job when the Employee Emergency Fund helped cover her son's cancer treatment. Instead of losing a good worker to a family crisis, Meridian had gained an advocate for life. Tommy Chen, a 19-year-old with autism in Seattle, had found meaningful employment after the company's new inclusive hiring practices gave him a chance. His attention to detail and dedication had made him Employee of the Month 3 times running. Janet Morrison had become one of Maya's closest allies and most effective regional directors. Her transformation from rigid rule enforcer to compassionate leader had inspired a documentary film that premiered at Sundance. The ripple effects had spread far beyond Meridian. Competitors, initially skeptical of the soft approach, began implementing similar programs when they couldn't match Meridian's employee retention and customer satisfaction. The entire food service industry had been forced to evolve. We proved that treating people with dignity isn't just morally right, Maya continued, it's economically smart. When you invest in your employees' humanity, they invest their hearts in your success. After her speech, Maya was approached by a young man she didn't recognize. He introduced himself as David Martinez, no relation, despite the shared surname, a recent business school graduate. Ms. Rodriguez, he said nervously, I wanted to thank you. 3 years ago, my mother was going through chemotherapy. She was working at a restaurant owned by one of your competitors, and they fired her for taking too many sick days. But when they heard about your program, they implemented something similar and rehired her with back pay. She's been cancer-free for 2 years now, and she still works there. Your $8 act of kindness saved my family. These encounters had become common for Maya. At airports, in grocery stores, at her daughter's school events, people would approach to share how the Human First initiative had touched their lives. Each story reinforced her belief that corporate America could have both a conscience and a profit margin. James Sullivan joined them, his eyes bright with pride. At 78, he had found purpose in his later years that had eluded him during his climb to CEO. I've been thinking about legacy lately, he said quietly. When I die, I don't want to be remembered as the man who built a restaurant empire. I want to be remembered as the man who learned it's never too late to do the right thing. The evening celebration was held at the original Sunrise Cafe, now designated as a historical landmark by the Phoenix City Council. A bronze plaque by the window read, Table 12, where humanity met policy, and humanity won. As the party wound down, Maya found herself alone at the famous table, Sophia beside her working on homework. The space looked different now, warmer, more welcoming. Pictures of employees and their families covered one wall, celebrating everything from graduations to new babies to retirements. Her phone buzzed with a text from her newest hire, Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a former Wall Street executive who had left her 7-figure job to join the Human First initiative. Just got confirmation, we're implementing the program at 847 new locations across 6 countries. The revolution is officially global. Maya smiled, remembering the terror she'd felt 5 years ago when James first offered her the position. She'd gone from serving food to serving something more substantial, hope, dignity, and proof that ordinary people could create extraordinary change. Sophia looked up from her homework. Mom, my history teacher wants you to speak to our class about social change. Can you tell them about Dad's cake? Of course, Mija, Maya said, her heart swelling. Carlos's birthday cake, the act of kindness that had cost him his job and ultimately his life, had become the foundation legend of their movement. His memory lived on in every policy change, every employee helped, every family kept together. As they prepared to leave, Maya took one last look at Table 12. Tomorrow she'd fly to London to consult with the European Union on implementing human first principles in their workplace legislation. Next month, she'd address the United Nations about the role of corporate compassion in global economic justice. But tonight, she was simply Maya Rodriguez, a woman who had learned that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo the loudest through history. $8 and a bowl of chili had taught the world that profit and compassion weren't enemies, they were partners waiting to change everything. The story that began with tears in a Phoenix cafe had become a testament to the transformative power of choosing humanity over policy, of remembering that behind every transaction is a human heart that deserves dignity, respect, and sometimes, just sometimes, a simple bowl of chili when the world seems too cold and hungry to bear.